August Dyer had not raised his voice at a social gathering in over 40 years. The last time was at a funeral. So when he leaned forward at the Ashwell Foundation Gala, his reading glasses still folded in his breast pocket, one hand resting on the white tablecloth, and said to the woman across from him, "I'd like to know where you got that shawl." The words landed like a stone dropped through still water. Ingrid Solberg paused mid-sentence. She had been describing the company's new creative direction to the museum director beside her, one hand gesturing toward the pale champagne silk draped over her shoulders. The gesture stopped. Her smile held, but only by habit. Ramona Dyer felt the air leave the room before it left her lungs. The shawl had disappeared from the locked cabinet in her studio 11 months earlier, 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She had searched for it, the way she searched for her grandmother's handwriting, in old letters, carefully, then frantically, then with a grief she couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't known what it meant. It was cream silk, hand-embroidered with trailing jasmine and small blue forget-me-nots. Her grandmother had made it over the course of a single winter 43 years ago and given it to Ramona on the morning of her 30th birthday. Inside the lower hem, stitched in violet thread so fine it was nearly invisible unless you knew to look, were the initials R.D. Not Ramona's initials alone, but her grandmother's as well. Ruth Dyer. 2 women sharing the same letters. Her grandmother had called it the only kind of signature that survived everything. Beckett Ashwell set down his fork with the careful deliberation of a man who had rehearsed the moment. He was Ramona's former husband, CEO of Ashwell Heritage Textiles, and the person who had arranged the seating chart. "Dad," he said, addressing August with the familiarity he had maintained through the divorce, like a second set of documents. "Ingrid has been wearing that piece for months. It was a gift." August did not look at him. "From whom?" he asked Ingrid. "From Beckett." She touched the edge of the shawl. Her voice was steady. "For our first anniversary." August reached into his jacket pocket and produced the small magnifying lens he carried everywhere, a habit from 35 years as a textile historian. He held it up without asking permission. "My mother stitched the forget-me-nots at an angle of 11 degrees, he said. "Every other embroiderer in her tradition used 9. She considered 9 degrees sentimental. She did not make sentimental objects." He looked directly at Ingrid. "The monogram inside the lower hem reads R.D., my daughter's initials, my mother's initials. I watched my mother finish that stitch." The table did not breathe. Beckett laughed, a short, managed sound. "August, you're describing a standard floral pattern. Ramona doesn't have a monopoly on jasmine embroidery." "The hem," Ramona said. Her voice came out level, which surprised her. "Bottom left corner." Ingrid's hand closed over the fabric. "You can't order me to." "The piece is registered in my grandmother's estate inventory," Ramona said. "I can give you the photograph reference number." The museum director beside Ingrid had gone very quiet. He had come to the gala to discuss a proposed donation of Ramona's original pattern archive to the Foundation's textile collection, a donation Beckett had, until recently, described to donors as Ingrid's curatorial vision. The shawl had not been the first thing Beckett took. Ramona understood that now, sitting at the far end of a table where she had once sat as the company's creative director, watching her former husband try to reframe her father's observation as a symptom of age, she understood it the way she had come to understand most things about Beckett. Slowly, then all at once, then in perfect retroactive order. Ashwell Heritage Textiles had started as her father's archive. August Dyer had spent decades cataloging regional American textile traditions, Appalachian weaving patterns, Louisiana indigo dyeing methods, Hawaiian kappa cloth techniques. When Ramona was 9 years old, she fell asleep beneath his drafting table while he annotated photographs. When she was 22, she began translating his research into wearable collections. The patterns were his scholarship. The designs were hers. The company, when it incorporated, listed both of them as founders. Beckett came later. He joined after business school, 8 years into Ramona's tenure, and became the company's public face within 3 seasons. He was charming at trunk shows, fluent with investors, and genuinely useful at the operational parts of the business that Ramona had never loved. The vendor negotiations, the licensing agreements, the quarterly projections. For a while, their ambitions seemed compatible. Then she noticed what happened to the attribution. A collection she had designed entirely, drawn from her grandmother's embroidery journals, appeared in a magazine profile described as Beckett Ashwell's vision for American heirloom revival. When Ramona called the journalist to correct the record, Beckett told her that evening the correction had made her look territorial. "The brand needs one voice," he said. "You're the soul of it. Everyone knows that. The press just needs a face." The sentence was designed to feel generous. Ramona spent 2 years accepting it before she understood what it cost her. The marriage frayed and ended in a single discovery, a forwarded invoice showing that Beckett had incorporated a separate company, Ashwell Private Studio, and had been filing Ramona's original designs under the new entity's name. The company had a listed creative director. Her name was Ingrid Solberg. Her employment contract described her as the originating designer of 12 patterns Ramona had sketched by hand, several of them years before she and Beckett had married. Ramona filed for divorce on the grounds of concealed business interests and fraudulent registration of intellectual property. She also filed an emergency injunction preventing the transfer or licensing of any design created during the marriage. The judge granted it within 72 hours. 3 weeks later, the shawl disappeared. The building security log showed a maintenance access request submitted under a vendor code linked to Beckett's office. The listed contractor had no active work order for the studio. A camera near the service entrance captured a woman, matching Ingrid's description, carrying a garment bag. It captured Beckett's car in the parking lot 20 minutes later. Ramona reported the theft to police and filed an insurance claim. She listed the shawl's provenance, her grandmother's estate inventory, registered photographs, and the studio access records. The insurance adjuster classified the claim as pending. The detective said they would need to establish that a specific person had removed a specific item. Ramona said she knew exactly which people. She did not name them to the press. She named them to her attorney. The investigation she built with her attorney, Celeste Park, no connection to any Ashwell employee, began not with the shawl but with the design registrations. Celeste was 60 years old, methodical and allergic to assumptions. "We prove the designs are yours first," she said at their initial meeting. "Then we prove who moved them. Then we talk about the shawl." She reminded Ramona that emotion was not inadmissible, but it was not evidence. Evidence was evidence. Ramona had kept records the way her father kept archives, obsessively, annotated, cross-referenced. She had original sketches with date stamps, color notes in margins that referenced specific conversations, specific seasons, specific mornings, when a particular plant in the studio window caught a particular light, process photographs taken across years, emails to suppliers discussing fabric weights and dye ratios for pieces that Ashwell Private Studio had filed as Ingrid's original concepts. The forensic firm August retained a former financial crimes investigator named Doris Hayward, who specialized in creative industry fraud, reviewed the registrations and found that 11 of the 12 disputed designs had been filed after the divorce injunction was in place. The 12th had been filed 2 days before. "That one is the problem," Doris said. "The injunction wasn't in force yet." "I designed it 4 years before we married," Ramona said. Doris asked for the original. Ramona produced a sketchbook, water-stained at one corner, with a date written in her own hand and confirmed by photograph metadata from her phone taken the same afternoon. The sketchbook also contained a note from August, commenting on the design. His handwriting was distinct and dated. That 12th design became the anchor. Doris found that Ashwell Private Studio had licensed all 12 designs to 3 manufacturers without disclosing the injunction. The manufacturers had not been informed there was a dispute. 2 had already produced inventory. 1 had sold product to retail accounts. The proceeds had been deposited into a private account controlled by Ingrid. The scheme was not automatically criminal in every element, but filing a design registration with false authorship, licensing intellectual property under a disputed claim, and concealing the injunction from business partners, those elements had names: wire fraud, false commercial representation, contempt of civil injunction. Doris used those names in her report. She did not soften them. Ramona stopped using Beckett's name when contacting business partners. She communicated through Celeste, in writing, with documentation attached. Written communication slows people down, Celeste had explained during their first meeting. That is often useful when someone relies on speed and confusion. The gala had been scheduled months before Ramona saw Ingrid wearing the shawl publicly. She had noticed it in a photograph posted to a preview event. Ingrid framed against white gallery walls, the cream silk unmistakable against her dark dress. Ramona had sent the screenshot to Celeste without a single word beside it. Celeste had responded, "Preserve it, don't engage yet." August had been the one to suggest attending the gala. "If you don't go," he said, "Beckett will tell the board you withdrew from the foundation. If I go, they'll try to use my reaction against me." "Then don't give them a reaction," he paused. "Give them a question." He had placed a small recording device beside his water glass when they arrived. Ramona had watched him do it. She had not asked him to. When she looked at him, he said simply, "A foundation meeting with financial implications." He added a dinner afterward. After August asked Ingrid where she had gotten the shawl, Beckett spent 7 minutes trying to redirect the evening. He called the question a misunderstanding, then a provocation, then a personal attack on a guest. He told the museum director that August's health had been difficult lately, which was false, and which August let pass without correction, because a lie told in a recorded room requires nothing from the person it targets. He told Ramona she was embarrassing herself, which was the same thing he had told her when she asked about missing design invoices during the final year of their marriage. Ramona said nothing for those 7 minutes. Then Celeste, seated 2 chairs away, placed a single document on the table. It was the estate inventory. Ruth Dyer's name was at the top. The shawl's description was on line 14. "The item is registered property," Celeste said. "If someone would like to explain the chain of transfer, we're listening." Ingrid looked at Beckett. Beckett looked at the document. The museum director asked quietly whether the textile archive donation was still under consideration, or whether that conversation needed to be postponed. August said it needed to be postponed. Beckett announced that the foundation was launching a new acquisition program under Ingrid's leadership, effective immediately. August stood up. "There will be no new acquisition program until the registration dispute is resolved," he said. "You're not on the acquisition committee," Beckett said. "I'm on the founding board. My name is on the first document filed." August touched the lapel of his jacket. "And the shawl is on the woman sitting across from me." The museum director withdrew his organization from the evening's planned pledge discussion and said he would need to consult his institution's legal team before proceeding. Ingrid began to cry. She said she hadn't known. She said Beckett had told her the shawl belonged to his family and that the transfer would be completed after the foundation announced the new initiative. Ramona looked at her for a long moment. She recognized the particular quality of that shock. Not surprised that she had been caught, but the earlier and more damaging surprise that the person who had placed her in front of the story had not told her what the story cost. Then Ramona looked away. The criminal inquiry that followed separated Beckett's conduct into specific charges. Prosecutors considered theft of personal property, fraudulent design registration, wire fraud for licensing proceeds obtained under false representation, contempt of civil injunction, and obstruction after he attempted to backdate a transfer document following the investigation's opening. Ingrid cooperated. Her attorney advised it within 2 weeks of the gala. She provided communications showing Beckett had told her the designs were undisputed company property and that the shawl was a family heirloom he was entitled to give. She also provided communications from after the point when she had learned otherwise, and continued anyway. The prosecution did not treat cooperation as a complete defense. Ingrid had made choices after she knew the origin of the items. The evidence showed precisely when that knowledge had begun. On the witness stand, she answered without evasion. "Did he tell you? The designs had been registered in your name without court disclosure?" "Yes." "Did you continue to use them?" "Yes." "Did you wear the shawl to the gala after learning it had been reported stolen?" A pause. "Yes." "Why?" "Because Beckett said if I wore it in public long enough, the story would become normal. He said donors needed to see me as the future of the company. He said the shawl would help them believe it." The jury convicted Beckett on all primary counts. The verdict on one secondary charge, a licensing contract where the documentation trail was incomplete, was an acquittal, and that mattered to Ramona. The jury had read carefully. They had not convicted him of everything. They had convicted him of what the evidence proved. That distinction was the difference between a mob and a court. The judge ordered restitution to manufacturers who had acted in good faith, forfeiture of the private account proceeds, and a prohibition on registering intellectual property in any creative field during supervised release. Ingrid received a reduced sentence, restitution requirements, and a restriction on serving as accredited designer on registered work for a defined period. The court noted her cooperation. Her attorney argued she had been manipulated. The prosecution agreed, and also argued that manipulation did not eliminate the choices she had made after learning the truth. Both things were accurate. The shawl was returned to Ramona 6 weeks after the verdict, released from the evidence room in a sealed box with a case number on the label. She took it to her father's house. They sat at the kitchen table with the piece laid flat between them under a lamp. August put on his reading glasses and found the lower hem without being asked. The violet initials were unchanged. R.D., he said. "Two of us," Ramona said. He folded the hem back carefully. "What do you want to do with it?" She thought about the first time she had worn it. At a gallery opening years before she married Beckett, when the work had been entirely hers and she had not yet learned to share credit with someone who was keeping the proceeds. She thought about her grandmother's hands working through a winter. She thought about 11 degrees. "I want the lining repaired," she said. "The clasp is bent." She took the shawl to the conservator she had trusted for 15 years, a woman who had no connection to Ashwell Heritage Textiles, its board, or its donors. The conservator cleaned the silk, straightened the clasp, and pressed the embroidery back into its original alignment without disturbing a single knot. The process took 3 weeks. Ramona did not rush it. She wore the shawl for the first time at the Foundation's governance presentation 4 months later. Not draped over her shoulders the way Ingrid had worn it, displayed, as though the wearing were an announcement. Ramona carried it, folded across her arm, the embroidery facing outward, an invitation to look closely, rather than a performance of ownership. An apprentice from the textile program approached her after the session with a question. "Those stitches are at an angle," the apprentice said, pointing to the forget-me-nots. "Is that intentional?" "Yes," Ramona said. 11 degrees. My grandmother thought 9 was sentimental." The apprentice wrote it in her notebook. Ramona looked at the shawl in her hands and thought about what her grandmother had built into the silk. Not a mark of legal ownership, but a question embedded in the thread itself. "Do you know what you're carrying? Do you know whose hands made this?" The Gala had answered that question in a room full of witnesses, because August had asked it plainly and required a response that Ingrid could not provide. Not because he had raised his voice, because he had raised a fact. She handed the shawl to the conservator's assistant for archiving. A new photograph, a condition report, a custody log with the date, and Ramona's signature at the bottom. "What name do I put on the record?" the assistant asked. Ramona gave her grandmother's full name and then her own. "2 names?" "1 piece," Ramona said. 2 signatures. They were always the same." She walked out of the archive room into a hallway where afternoon light came through a tall window and fell across the floor in long, even lines. She did not look back to check whether the shawl was secure. She had built a system for that. She had also built a life that no longer required her to stand in doorways, wondering whether what she had made would still belong to her when she returned. It would. The record said so. And for the first time in longer than she could precisely measure, Ramona Dyer trusted the records more than the silence, which was the same as trusting herself.